The ballroom was dripping with chandeliers, their crystal droplets scattering golden light across the polished marble floor. Guests in black tuxedos and glittering gowns clinked their glasses, laughter spilling like champagne over the string quartet's music. Yet in the midst of this elegance, silence cracked the air. The kind of silence that made heads turn, made whispers ignite, and made pride sharpen like broken glass. A young boy, no more than 12, stood trembling at the center of the room. His legs, twisted and weakened since birth, buckled beneath him as he struggled to stay upright. His father, the host of this grand affair, a man whose wealth was measured in skyscrapers and shipping fleets, stared at his son with cold, simmering shame. The boy had dared to step forward when no one expected him to. Daring to be seen in a world that preferred he remain hidden in the shadows of wealth. But what froze the crowd into stunned silence was not the boy alone. It was the man who had dared to join him. His skin, dark as the rich soil from which generations of strength had risen, glistened with sweat beneath the ballroom lights. He was not a guest, nor a business partner, nor anyone deemed worthy of the millionaire's circle. He was the family's cook, humble, quiet, invisible to most who ate his food but never asked his story. And there he was, holding the boy's trembling hand, guiding him in a slow, unsteady dance across the floor. The millionaire's eyes narrowed, fury swelling in his chest. Gasps rippled across the tables. To the guests, it looked like an offense, a violation of invisible boundaries. A servant had stepped out of line. A boy who should not have dared was brought to the center. And the cook, the black man in a sea of pale wealth, was the one who had put him there. The boy's face glowed, fragile but defiant. His lips trembled as he whispered something only the cook could hear. And in that instant the cook smiled. Not with arrogance, not with rebellion, but with the steady warmth of someone who knew dignity was not granted by wealth, but born into the marrow of every human being. The millionaire rose from his chair. Chairs scraped, diamonds clinked, forks froze in midair. He moved toward them, each step echoing like a verdict across the polished marble. Guests braced themselves for an eruption, for wealth to crush dignity, for silence to once again swallow voices that had dared to rise. What the millionaire said next would leave the entire room holding its breath. But before that moment, the cook remembered. Long before he stood in this room of chandeliers and fine china, he had stood in kitchens where the scent of frying onions and simmering stew masked the ache of an empty stomach. He had grown up in a town where the world reminded him daily that he was less seen, less valued, less worth. But his mother's hands had held him firm, teaching him that food could heal when words failed, that music could lift when legs faltered, and that dignity could be carried even when the world tried to strip it away. He had once dreamed of being a dancer. His body had carried rhythm like it carried breath. But his dreams had been set aside to care for his family, to provide for siblings who needed him. So he cooked, because cooking was love made visible. Years later, he had been hired by this very millionaire, not because the man cared for his story, but because his food carried a soul that no Michelin-starred chef could imitate. The cook had served in silence, watching guests laugh, watching deals sealed over plates he had poured his heart into. And always he had noticed the boy who lingered at the edge of the room, clutching his crutches, the boy whose own father looked away when strangers pitied him, the boy who seemed to shrink a little smaller each time wealth and perfection were paraded before him. The cook had seen him once in the kitchen, tracing his finger along the grooves of the counter as though it were a stage. His eyes had flickered with longing when the radio played a waltz. And when he thought no one was watching, he had taken one trembling step, then another before collapsing in shame. That night the cook had knelt beside him. He hadn't offered pity. He had simply offered his hand. The boy had taken it. And together, slowly, awkwardly, with more courage than grace, they had begun to move. Now in the center of the grand ballroom, they moved again. The boy's steps were halting, clumsy. The cook's steps were steady, guiding. Their dance was not polished, not elegant, not worthy of applause in the eyes of the wealthy, but it was a dance born of defiance, dignity, and love. The millionaire stopped before them, his shadow falling like a judgment across the floor. Guests held their breath, waiting for the explosion. His lips parted, ready to strike them down with words that would reaffirm the hierarchy everyone expected. But then his son looked up at him, In his boy's eyes, the millionaire saw something he had not dared to see in years: joy. Not the shallow joy of gifts or vacations, but the radiant, trembling joy of being seen, being allowed to exist fully. And in the cook's steady gaze, he saw no rebellion, no disrespect, only a quiet insistence that his son deserved more than silence. For a long moment, the millionaire said nothing. The weight of his silence pressed harder than any words could. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of his own youth, when he too had been told he would never rise above the dirt he was born into. Perhaps it was the faint tremor in his son's legs as he fought to stand tall. Or perhaps it was the realization that all his wealth could not buy what was unfolding before him: courage, dignity, and love. The millionaire bent down. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his hand on his son's shoulder. Gasps broke across the room again, not in outrage this time, but in disbelief. And then, in a voice that carried across the marble and chandeliers, he spoke words that no one expected. "If a man can teach my son to dance, when even I could not teach him to walk, then he is more than a cook. He is my teacher." The room erupted, not in applause, but in silence. A silence so deep, so reverent that it gave everyone goosebumps. The millionaire turned to the cook, their eyes locked. Not as master and servant, not as rich and poor, not as white and black, but as fathers, as men, as equals. "You have given him what I could not." "Dignity," the millionaire said. "And for that, you have given me more than all the money in this room." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. He reached for his father's hand with one and held on to the cook's hand with the other. Together they stood, a fragile triangle of strength that no prejudice, no wealth, no barrier could shatter. The guests, one by one, rose to their feet, not in gossip, not in scandal, but in respect. Some bowed their heads, others wiped tears they didn't expect. And in that ballroom, the walls of hierarchy cracked, if only for a moment. Later, people would whisper about what they had witnessed that night. Some would say it was unthinkable, others would call it miraculous. But those who had truly seen would remember one thing: the power of silent dignity. The cook never sought recognition. He returned to his kitchen the next morning, sleeves rolled up, hands busy with spices and heat. But in the boy's eyes, he was no longer invisible. In his father's heart, he was no longer just a cook. And in the world beyond that ballroom, a seed had been planted. A reminder that the greatest wealth is not measured in fortunes, but in the courage to honor dignity wherever it blooms. For those who stood there that night, one line remained etched in memory, whispered like a prayer long after the chandeliers dimmed. Respect is not given by money. It is earned by humanity. And so the story spread, not as a tale of scandal, but as a testimony of how a single act of courage, one dance, one moment, could give an entire room goosebumps and remind the world of what truly matters.